We're in session 15 of our course, Come to Papa, Encountering the Father that Heals Our Deepest Pain. And in this week's sessions, we're looking at the story of the prodigal in Luke chapter 15. I'm calling it the Embracing Father. And in session 13, we talked about the younger son who went his way and was welcomed back into the Father's house with the tenderness of the Father's heart. No restraint. Session 14, we talked about the father's going after the older brother. So we've had these two sons, the younger brother that goes away from the father's house to celebrate, the older brother who goes away from the father's heart in order to work. He becomes a slave. And here what we want to talk about in this session is the reality of Jesus as the true son and the true servant, who knew both how to celebrate and to work while connected to the Father's heart, so that his celebration and his work and his relationship were really all one thing. You know, Jesus said it this way, "I and the Father are one. It is my delight, my very food is to do my Father's will. I never do anything except what I see my Father doing. I don't even speak anything unless I hear my Father saying it." And so what Jesus is modeling here in this story is that he is really the third son in the picture. He's the true son who has learned how to celebrate in the Father's house, in the presence of the Papa's heart, and he has learned how to labor in relationship with the Father. He's never left the Father's presence, either to celebrate or to labor. You know, James Dobson, that sort of guru of family counseling and family wisdom over the years, made this statement one time. He said, a son's highest form of play is to work with his father. That's a brilliant statement. And that's what Jesus exemplifies here, that his joy, his delight was to do the will of the Father. He called it his very food in John chapter 4. And so what Jesus is modeling here to the tax collectors and sinners, as well as to the scribes and the Pharisees, that he's the true son, and he actually comes as the servant in the story. He comes to take those broken younger sons, the ones who have wasted themselves away from the Father's heart, dropping out of the system, wandering away because they're lost sheep and wayward sons, and he comes to bring them back in and draw them to the Father's heart. Likewise, he comes to the shepherds, and he confronts them, but he welcomes them. It's not a confrontation that's rooted in a desire to separate or to cast off. It's in a desire of the Father's heart, the Papa's heart, to draw those older brothers back into the context of his grace and mercy and love, so that the younger brother and the older brother will be joined together, that the lost sheep will become joined again to the sheep and to the shepherd in the right kind of relationship. And so Jesus models this thing as the son who has never left the Father's presence. He came in the fullness of time. See, the younger son left the Father's presence prematurely, and he dragged his umbilical cord behind him trying to find a place to plug in. Jesus never separated from the Father's presence. He came in the fullness of time at the sending of the Father, and so his separation physically from the Father's presence was never a disconnect. He came intimately in communion. He would get up early in the morning, and it was his habit to go and pray and connect with his Father, so that the Father, it says in John chapter 5, that the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he does. And so his work, the ministry of Jesus, was intimately tied to their love relationship. The Father loves the Son, shows him everything, and Jesus only does what the Father shows him to do. So out of that intimate friendship, Jesus does the work of the ministry. And in that kind of place, he celebrates. He enjoys the time with the tax collectors and sinners. As a matter of fact, in the story of that he tells in Matthew chapter 11, he pictures himself as being perceived as a glutton and a winebibber, as one who enjoyed partying, in contrast to John the Baptist, who was very sober and focused like a mourner at a funeral, he pictured himself, or he was perceived as one who just partied all the time, celebrated all the time. And Jesus' joy in serving was because he was connected to the Father's heart all the time. He had the Father's perspective, Papa's heart for the broken and for the leaders who had wandered away from the Father's heart as well. And then he gives his perspective to the servants. I love this part of the story. You know, when I first started meditating on the prodigal son, my thought was, where's the accountability? How can he restore him to full status? The robe, the ring, the shoes, the whole thing, he just restores him to full status. There's no accountability here. There's no sort of period of transition to see whether he's trustworthy again. And then it occurred to me, and I believe the Holy Spirit showed me, that the accountability structure is the servants. The Father says to the servants, dress him now. Get that robe on him. Wash him up. He smells like a pig. I'm glad he's back, but he smells bad. Go get him cleaned up. Dress him in his robe. Put the shoes on him. Put the ring on his finger. Get him dressed and make sure he doesn't forget anything, because he got brain damaged out there in the far country. And he's forgotten who he is. He was overwhelmed with shame, and he forgot his identity as a son, as an heir to my kingdom. And so when he came back, he just wanted to be a servant, and he doesn't realize he's a son. And so servants, dress him. And what it occurs to me in this story is that all of us stand in both relationships here. We are sons before the Father, and we are servants before one another. We are called to live like Jesus lived, in that perfect sonship, where we celebrate and we labor with joy in intimacy with the Father, just like Jesus did. But he also said of himself, I am the servant of all. I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. So Jesus is exemplifying true servanthood here. And what he is doing to the tax collectors and sinners, and what he's doing to the scribes and the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, is he is dressing them again in the robes of righteousness, in the coat of sonship, the shoes of inheritance, the ring of authority. And he's saying, come in, let me tell you who you really are. And he's speaking to them out of the Father's heart like true servants. And the Father is commanding the servants, surround my son now. Don't let him forget who he is. He got brain damaged out there. Make sure he's got his robe on. Make sure he's got his shoes on. Make sure that ring of authority is on his hand. And stay with him until he gets it. Stay with him until his mind has been renewed and he starts thinking like a son again instead of like a slave. Be with him and reaffirm his sonship. Tell him who he is again and again according to my heart, so that that shame will be washed away, so that that thing will be gone out of his life and he can begin to relate to me again in freedom and in confidence. The accountability is with the servants. And so we all stand before the Father as that son, welcomed into his presence. Whether we're a younger son or an older son, we're welcomed into the Father's heart. And he embraces us and says, you're my son. Everything I have is yours. But before one another, we stand as those servants, listening to the Father's heart, taking his perspective and relating to one another as the Father sees them, not according to our judgments, not according to the older brother's perspectives that would bring division and bring resentment and hatred, but according to the Father's heart, Papa's heart that embraces them both, heals their deepest pain, and restores them to his heart of celebration and joy. So consider, as you ponder these things, consider how Jesus perfectly models the joyful servant nature of the Father. You see, the Father is a servant. Jesus came as a servant because the Father is a servant. And he welcomes both groups into the Father's heart based on that. And then, let me ask you this. What would need to happen in your heart in order to embrace both groups of people represented in this parable in the Spirit of the Father? What needs to happen in you and me? How do we relate to the broken, lost younger son? How do we relate to the crabby old judgmental older son, and how do we, in the Spirit of Christ, the true son, the true servant who operates out of Papa's heart, how do we relate to both groups and become a catalyst to bring them both into the presence of the Father, to enjoy his house, to celebrate with him, and to labor for the inheritance that is really already ours, laboring together with the Father, our highest joy. God bless you as you think about these things.